You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Alia Sinclair. Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Hello, and welcome to this week's show of the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about art, life, and all that jazz. I'm your host, Alia Sinclair, and today we're going to kick off with a segment I call Food for Thought. A new year is upon us, and whether you are the kind to make resolutions or not, there is a transitional energy in the air, a sense of resetting, realigning, wiping the slate clean, and starting over. For many, 2023 was a difficult year. A year they are happy to see go. But as we step into the fresh, white, yet unwritten page that is 2024, I want to take a moment to reflect on how we can go forward as our best selves. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in a workshop on creative goal setting. The coach said something I've been thinking a lot about. He said, when we're trying to decide between paths A and B, usually we try to project what will happen if we choose one route over the other. We compare pros and cons, being led by our pragmatism and our best educated guesses about the outcome of each choice. But the truth is, we have no idea what will happen down either path. But you can put money on it being nothing like you expect, even with all that hard thinking beforehand. So, how do we make choices? The answer is by our values. If we know what kind of person we want to be, how we want to show up in the world, what we value and prioritize, the tough decisions make themselves. So, this year, instead of trying to decide between this and that goal of self-improvement, try going back to the basics. Who are you? What do you value? What do you want the impact of your work to be on the world? Move forward with your value system and watch the rest realign.
You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Alia Sinclair, at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Alia Sinclair, and you're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, and all that jazz. Today, I'm here with the artistic director of Burien Actors Theater, or BAT for short, Eric Dickman, and the managing director of BAT, Maggie Larrick. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So I would love to start if you'd give us some background on BAT, how it began, and possibly the history of community theater in the area before BAT, which, you know, both are probably rather large topics, but I'll let you take it away.
So BAT was formed out of a bunch of community theater folks in the area. There was a lot of community theater kind of beginning in, our understanding was about the 1950s in Burien. And in 1980, Chelsea Park Elementary School was surplused by the Highline School District to King County. Burien was not yet a city. So King County had a parks department that ran a community center for Burien at that time, or for the Burien area. And at the county basically said, hey, we'd like to have somebody in our new community center that we're creating to do theater, but only one group. So what happened was a number of the actors and performers and designers and other people who were involved with theater at that time in our area came together, created Burien Little Theater. Our understanding is it was primarily members of workshop theater. And then they incorporated in 1980 because they were told you can be in here, but you have to be incorporated. So that's how it was incorporated as Burien Little Theater at that time. So then And again, Eric and I weren't involved until 2005. So this is, what we've got gathered through records, and Barbara Reamer, who's had long-standing relationship with the theater in varying capacities. She's currently on our board, and her husband did some amazing stuff for the theater. At one point, he was such a multi-talented man, did everything from designing to directing to acting. So she was the one who kind of helped us put that history together, so we had some understanding of it. Then the city incorporated in 1993, and the city took over that community center as part of its own Parks Department. And so Burien Actors Theater, then Burien Little Theater, fell under it was basically renting from first King County, then the city. So we were never a program of either one, even though some people, think because of the location that we were. In the beginning, there was no rent at all.
Nice. We like
County,
that.
Yeah. King County came in and put in a couple of 200 amp services to really give us the ability to do, whatever we needed to with lighting and sound, because you need a certain amount of power for those. Although now that we have LED lights, some of that's changing. But at that time, it was you definitely need a lot of power to have a good light grid in particular.
Yeah.
So they were very supportive. They helped with a variety of things in order to help the theater grow. And I think they had, if my understanding was, there was somebody from the county on the board of Burien Actors Theater, at least in the beginning. So then the city took over, and I don't know at what point the rent started to be charged. And we were always a tenant at the end, at what became known as the annex to the community center, because in 2010, I think it was, somewhere around in the 2010, I think, was when the old library, which was a block and a half or so from the annex where we were located, or the old Chelsea Park Elementary, then the Parks Department turned that into a community center. And they moved their main operations there, and now suddenly the two buildings that we were in that had been Chelsea Park needed to have more activity, albeit some of us were in there from the time it was also a community center. But there was lots of empty spaces.
Yeah.
So at that point, other nonprofits were brought in. Highliner's Youth Theater Education Organization, Transform Burien, trying to remember who else. The Burien Preschool Co-op had already been there and was still there, for example. So there was this group of small nonprofits that were in the buildings. And then COVID.
Good old COVID.
Yay. And right before COVID, there were, the city did some studies on the property, actually had somebody look at it and say, based on a building of this age, here are the kinds of problems you would run into. And the city became concerned about the safety of the buildings and decided that everybody should be out. They gave us a super short timeline initially. This was on December 9th of 2019, and we were told to be out by the end of January of 2020. Bunch of us said, hey, we can't be out that fast, including the Burien Co-op Preschool, who had a huge built infrastructure of things that the kids used that were in the building, that were large structures within the building and out in their own little courtyard. And of course, we had an entire theater because the city did not own the lights, the light grid, the pipe and chain that everything was on, the curtains, the theater curtains, the sound equipment, the seating, which is, as anybody knows who's was in there, is a lot.
Yeah.
The dressing room booths, everything was ours.
So you had to find a new place to go.
Right, we had to find a new place to go. So There was it was a tense time for the city and us as we all came together to try to figure out an alternative.
Yes.
And there were some protests as part of that. And we were given an extension through the end of July of 2020. And of course, trying to find a place for there aren't performing spaces down in our area. So what we ended up doing was finding storage through the kindness of Highline Schools in one of their old schools that is no longer used as a school, but more as storage and other things. So in July of 2020, we moved everything out.
Great. So how did you end up in your current space? And if you could talk about where your current space is.
Well, but right after that, of course, COVID hit.
Yep.
And everybody was shut down, including theaters.
Yes.
So we jumped onto Zoom. We didn't know what Zoom was, but we jumped onto Zoom, and we did 16 live shows with multiple performances on Zoom. And during that process, we scoured South King County for places to be, and couldn't find any. And we're faced with the real possibility of shutting down. And then through the kindness of Kennedy Catholic High School, they are letting us use their little theater in the basement of their school. Now they have a drama department who also uses it, so it's a shared thing. But they really made that possible for us, and that's where we are now. And we have done one season and are getting ready to open the second show of the second season there. And it's a fun little 120-seat house.
But you're still in the hunt for the forever home, or at least the new home.
Right.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah. And during this period, well, just before the city decided that they would tear down the annex, we had decided we were growing beyond its capacity. So we started putting together a plan to build a space. Well, it took a lot of time to tear the theater down and move it, and then COVID and everything else. So recently, about a year and a half ago, our board, we had a big retreat, and we all agreed, the board agreed, that we should build a 300-seat performing arts space in South King County, hopefully in Burien.
Would love to see that
So
happen.
right now, we are getting ready for a request for proposal from the county to try to get a piece of land. We're also being courted by cities nearby. But Maggie and R's preference is to be in Burien if we can, but mostly we want to do theater.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're in this kind of transition period while we're at Kennedy, trying to grow back out of COVID. Theaters are still struggling.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we will put together, if we can raise the funds, we will put together a wonderful performing arts space that is desperately needed in South King County. It's a venue vacuum down here. There's just a handful of performing arts centers. And in that center, we also want to have a museum, and not a museum, but an art gallery, sorry.
Right.
I was in the museum and I was thinking about that. An art gallery, a coffee shop, and make it a big communal place where people can gather. Keep it busy. We'll have smaller performing art spaces and then the big 300-seat house.
Yeah.
So the idea would be a space that's busy almost all the time.
Yeah.
So that's our goal, but all that requires is money and luck.
Yes. just a couple little things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Off of that idea of communal gathering, I know that inclusivity is a big part of the company and the theater. You want to talk about a little bit about that mission with BAT?
Yeah, so I've done more than one thing in my life, including at one point I was editor of, and then managing editor of a small group of small newspapers.
Well, before that, you were actually a reporter and the editor of what was then the Highline Times,
Correct.
which is now the West Side Seattle.
Yes.
Oh,
But when
very
it was
cool.
a paper, she started as a reporter and became the editor down here. Got to know Burien quite well during that period.
Yes. And one of the interesting experiences I'd had, I kind of knew the day my body started changing as a child and I started hit puberty, I was like, I'm going to be treated differently because I'm female, and I didn't like it. So then, here I am, I'm an editor of this small newspaper, and a guy comes in and he goes, well, I'd like to talk to the editor. And I'm like, well, I'm the editor. Oh. Well, then I'd like to talk to the publisher. I'd like to talk to him. And it was a reminder to me about discrimination, which I know happens on so many levels, and it's still there. It's not something that's gone away yet. Yes, it's changed, and we've made some improvements, but we're not done with it by a long shot.
No.
And it was a reminder to me that, and it's not, and I knew when, with my body changing, and I had had a friend who was Black, and then we went out and did some things together, and my grandmother had said some things about, well, blah, 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 and I go, well, even though I wasn't in love with him, I said, well, the heart goes where the heart goes. Sorry.
Heart wants what it wants, Grandma.
Right. So I said, I hope you will still love me, because I will still love you, no matter who I'm with or, who is in my life. So those things were kind of always in my mind. And so when we got involved in 2005 with the theater was having some serious struggles at that point. And part of our job was to help, as the group that came in to help bring it forward, was to bring it into the 21st century, get it a website, get it up to date, bring the quality up, get an audience again, do all of those things. And I never forgot what it was like to be discriminated against. And so I was like, so can we have more scripts with roles for women? And like strong women roles, not just wife, mom, whatever. So let's look for those.
Something that passes the Bechdel test.
Right.
Anything.
So I'm like, okay, this is important. And then that was sort of, we had to start with a focal point. And then we started expanding out. We started looking, well, does it matter what age the character is? Then it was like, does it matter what color the character is? Does it matter what their gender identity is? And where and how can we stretch those boundaries, even if it's something that you might consider historical. So here's kind of a weird blend of the two. It's Shakespeare. We're doing Arnie Zaslav's A Midsummer's Night's Dream, which is set in the 1950s. Theseus is the school principal. Black guy comes in, absolutely kills his audition with One Summer Night. And we're like, oh, he's it. He's Theseus for sure as the school principal, because that was Theseus's song. But we're going, okay, so it's really a white high school. That would not happen at that time.
Right.
You wouldn't have Black principal of white high school. But we said, all right, it's Shakespeare. Does anybody care? This was in, I think, and I could be misremembering, I think it was like 2010.
Okay.
And we're like, do you think anybody cares? And we're like, you know what? We don't care. So we're going to go for it. No one said a word. It was great. And we were like, you know what? That just proves sort of our hypothesis. So since then, we have, even in a historical piece, had, say, the Black daughter of a piece set in 1910, the Black daughter of white parents, wealthy parents. Never would happen, for example. But she was the right person for the role. And we also want to have our community on stage, our world.
Yeah, representation is very important. It always has been. We have had people of color, we've had people with disabilities, we've had you name it, transgender, all kinds of things. Our Rocky Horror, which was shut down during COVID, Brad and Janet were both Black, and Janet was trans. And again, no complaints. And the caveat I should tell you about no complaints is we've only done a handful of shows in all the time Mag and I have been here where I haven't gotten at least one email complaining about something. So when I say we didn't get a complaint, that's really a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Because people seem to have no trouble telling me when they don't like something. So, which is good. We love the feedback. But
Yeah.
So it's become part of who we are
Yeah.
and how we do what we do, where we're always going, okay, where are people not getting an opportunity? Because
Yeah.
to me, I said, what it's really about is, regardless of how you're born,
Mm-hmm.
you should have the same opportunities. And that's the thing that always bothered me, was like, well, you don't get to do this because you're a girl,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of opened my eyes to, oh, by the way, and if you're black
Mm-hmm.
or Asian or, something else, or, oh my, you're gay. Well, you can't do that. And it's like, well, why not?
Why not? Yeah, I listening to you talk, I was thinking that that's a huge encouragement for actors, because so often when you're an actor, you're like, well, if I'm not the stereotypical ingenue or the leading man, then I can't perform, even if you're just like amazing at what you do.
Yep.
And as you say, it shouldn't matter if you're the right one for the role, you're the right one for the role, and it's all art anyway.
Right.
Like, who are we to put those made up lines on art, who is its own being and will be what it will be?
Yes. And body size is an issue, even, for example. And so I had a very voluptuous young woman who tried out for Titania in Midsummer, and she killed it. She had the power that character has to have. You have to believe Titania commands, everything. So she did, and I said, she's sexy. And she had that sexy power too. So I said, right, she's cast.
She's the one.
And again, no one said, oh my, why did you, which I find really revolting. And she was perfect for the role. She had everything she needed. So again, it's like, sometimes people go, okay, I'm going to let my eyes blinder me to who that person is inside, or how that actor is projecting something or creating something from internally for this character. And to us, it's always about, do you capture the essence of the character? Is there anything about who you are, what you're doing with that is going to take us out of the story?
And adding to that a little bit is, we are also sensitive to what the text says.
Yeah.
Not only, there are some lines, like if you say, I just went to high school, you can't cast somebody who's 70 in that role.
Right.
Okay, so there are some limits. But more importantly for us, when we read the text to decide what shows we're going to do, we look, is the play racist? Is the play sexist? Are there lines in there that are disturbing? A good example is, early on we did a Christmas show.
Are you talking Tuna Christmas?
Yeah,
Yes.
Tuna Christmas. Very funny. People loved it. It's a great little comedy show. And I hate Christmas shows, so a couple years later, we're trying to do a show, and I said, somebody suggests, why don't we do Tuna again? So we did Tuna Christmas again. And in Tuna Christmas, there's a radio station that's KQWZ, and it's for the whitest radio station in Texas.
Right.
And there's a bunch of jokes, and they make fun of the Klan in it. And the first time through, it was funny. The second time through, I'm standing off to the side watching this, and there's a few people of color in the audience, and other people were laughing, and they weren't. And that was my moment of recognition that never, ever will I do a script again that I don't reread, first of all. And second of all, there's nothing funny about racism or sexism.
Right.
So this propels us to choose scripts that tend to be in the last 10 years. Now, not always. Our next show is from 1956, but it's an exception. But, generally we choose recent scripts because they're more sensitive to those issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it all comes together. We want a good script, and we want good actors, and then as broad a spectrum of those as you can get. And again, very important for us that everybody is represented on our stage. Both the playwright, who, if they're of color, that's good too. I mean, everything. We read as many different scripts to get as wide of spans as we can, because it's all about inclusion. And we want you to hear a story that, maybe you're not sensitive to women's issues, but if you hear a script that raises those in a way that's palatable to you, maybe you go home and talk about them.
Yeah.
And all that's important to us.
Yeah, the transformative power of art.
Right.
That's what it
and
does.
we see that as part of our role as a theater, is to, make our, not that we have an agenda, but make our audience at least open to the idea that the views they came into might not be the same views they left with. They might be. But we want to propose something that gets you to think in a way that's positive. We don't want to beat you over the head with something.
Right.
But that's why we tend to do shows that have some comic aspect in it. If you're laughing and you're being told that you should change your behavior, that's one thing. If you're being preached at, that's another.
Yeah.
So it's a combination. The theater, since Mag and I have been involved, that's been our driving force, is getting as many different kinds of people on stage, as many different kinds of stories, with the caveat that we want to stay away from things that are, racist and sexist. We don't want to put that on our stage.
Right. And I will say that doesn't mean you shy away from difficult things either, because I reviewed your show of Tiny Beautiful Things, whenever that was, and there was some heavy content in there, right? So it's not just like, oh, that's rough, so we're not going to interact with that material, because I've seen that you will interact with the difficult things, but not at someone else's expense, and I think that's the difference.
Right, that's the idea. How to do it in a way that brings everybody into the conversation.
Right, yeah, and hopefully, like you said, maybe broaden some horizons, perspectives in the process.
And we hope to entertain while we're doing it, because a lot of us are looking for that entertainment.
Yes.
Even if we're looking for more than that, we appreciate wit.
Yes.
Typically. So, and that takes a fair amount of time. That Eric is the one who finds the scripts, and then they get vetted through a series of readers who then say, okay, what about this, what about that, and then comes back to kind of a decision-making process that involves me and Eric and a couple of other people. So
my reading tends to be a little on the dark side. So rather than be pulled into that hole, we have people who help us, and it makes it much better. But, having said that, we did do a show called Zombie, which is an amazingly fun script, but it's a one-person show about
it's a serial
killer pedophile.
Yes.
Oh, dear.
So it's not really a fun script as in humor, but it is a look into the mind of a serial killer, pedophile, and how that ticks, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But very dark.
Yeah.
So that was we did that as a late night in person back at the Annex. And then we did it online, and I actually got to direct, I had directed the first one, and I got to direct the playwright because we were on Zoom. And here he is, coming from New York.
That's awesome.
And he's a professor at, I think it was, is it Yale?
Yeah.
I believe. So a professor of writing and theater at Yale. So very exciting to be able to do that.
Yes.
But, again, a very different than a lot of the shows we do. So we do try other things from time to time as well.
Yeah.
Just to see.
Yeah, push the envelope a little. Yeah, variety.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the challenges that you have faced through all of this, but is there something, you said since 2005, so about 18 years you've been in this particular game. What are some triumphs that you're particularly proud of, or that may stand out to you the most?
We're still here.
Yes, yes. Round of applause. That is quite a tenure for theater.
Between getting the theater restarted, I mean, it wasn't dead, but it didn't have a season when we came in. To losing our space, we had a fire.
Oh goodness.
And then COVID.
Yep.
And a lot of our friends, a number of theaters didn't survive COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a dark, it still is, a dark time for theater. And we managed to survive. And we did it with the support from our community, our board members and our volunteers. We would not be here without them. So that is our number one thing we're proud of, is that we've made it through COVID and we're still up and running, still putting on shows. So
Yep, resilience.
That's the crown
Yep.
right there.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of people to put on a show. It takes everybody from someone who comes to usher, who volunteers to usher a show, to somebody who's sewing costumes, or making alterations, or helping paint the set. It's not just the designers. There's a whole support system of other people who help with marketing and, putting out posters and just a variety of things. And, even bigger theaters, they may not have the same amount of volunteerism, but they have, because they have more paid positions. But smaller theaters have fewer paid positions, or none, depending. But it's those volunteers that none of us, not a big theater or a small theater, could do what we do without them. And we're really lucky. I mean, our audience, it's not, and our volunteers come from all over, our audience comes from all over. And the good thing about that is they eat and drink in Burien, and we've had a couple of people even move to Burien once they discovered downtown.
Yeah.
They said this was really cool, so,
Here we are.
pre-COVID, they actually moved to Burien because they enjoyed it so much after coming down for our shows.
I love that.
So we were like, oh, that's cool. So, we hope that we are as helpful to the community as a community is to us, because we know people eat and drink before and after shows here. Sometimes they shop. We had to watch, somebody had bought like a couch somewhere, and we had to watch their truck in the parking lot during the show to make sure nothing happened to the couch until they came out and left.
That's amazing.
So we know that happens as well. And we've done a variety of things over time to be supportive to the community, from having $5 back coins that we would give out at performances, and people could use them at local businesses who signed on for it. And the $5 was entirely paid by BAT. The business didn't eat any of it, which is unusual for those kinds of coupon deals. And then, just things like cookies in our concessions from local bakeries, and then little signs to advertise that it's from them. So just those.
For a long time we had chocolates from Amar Chocolates, which was in Old Burien here. She no longer is around, and we're looking for a new chocolatier to make us bats.
You hear that?
Yeah,
New chocolatier
out there, let us know.
Contact Burien Actors Theater.
Yeah. I think
one more thing about our big successes. One thing about theater is it's very temporal. It's gone, right? So after every show, audience members come out and say, "This is the best show you ever did." And then the next show, that same audience member will come out and say, "This is the best show you ever did." So part of it, when you look at successes as a theater, it's hard to look at like a show and say that, because it's gone.
Yeah.
And if you didn't come and see it, you're never going to get to see that show. It's not like Netflix or Hulu, where you can watch it 25 times because you like it.
Yeah.
So for us, again, moving forward is the success, because our next show will be our greatest show ever. And the one after that will be our greatest. Ask any of our audience, and they'll tell you that.
And there are typically challenges of different kinds with every single show.
Yeah.
And I would say, if you for a couple of those successes, when we had a fire in 2013, December of 2013, it was on a Tuesday. We had just finished the second weekend of a 4-weekend Christmas show run. And then we get the call, and we're going, oh my God, and all of our stuff is smoke damaged and everything else. So we then started madly looking for a space. We had the insurance company arranging for steam cleaning of our props and costumes and a little bit of the set pieces. We couldn't work with a whole lot of it, but there was a little bit that we needed. And we finally were able to, thanks to the museum here, shoehorn ourselves into, this was before they had this facility. So this was in 2013. They had created a little pop-up museum on 153rd in an old store there. And we were able to shoehorn what was like a huge stage, plus we had platforms out to the sides of the stage where we had things going on. And we took that whole thing and condensed it into a tiny little space with 17 actors.
Oh, wow.
Where if you put all 17 there, they had a little sort of speaking lecture area they had created. And we were able to borrow like risers from Highliners and chairs from the museum and
lights from
from
Duke's Bay
Duke's
production
Bay,
in
yep.
Tacoma. Curtains from other theaters. I mean, the whole theater community jumped in and helped us.
And literally by Friday night, we were doing a tech preview performance in this tiny little space where we took something that was spread out in that nice big space we had at the annex into this tiny little area that you could barely have 17 people all standing together in.
So from Tuesday when you had the fire, and by Friday you were up, and that's incredible.
We did an open to the public tech run, and Saturday we started a full run.
And we
again.
had packed houses.
Packed house, wow.
Of course, the house was about half the size.
But
nevertheless, a full house is a full house.
A full house is a full
house. It was
house.
about 2/3. It was about 67 or something like that instead of 100.
Wow,
So,
and that's something I keep hearing, and more I work with the museum and the radio station and the theater, is the constant community coming together and these organizations coming together to help bolster each other up.
Yes, and we could not have done it otherwise.
No.
Yeah. And the city pushed for us to get because it was an old building and they were not going to use it before there'd be a new rental, but they actually did a speed authorization of us to cut a hole in a wall.
Oh, wow.
So that the actors could actually have a pass through so they could get to the restrooms and back to the dressing area and then around that we had created in the space.
Wow.
Which, normally would have been very cumbersome. We could never have gotten it done in time. The city helped out, and the city helped out when we also, because we still didn't have our space up to speed for the next show, which was a 2-story set that rotated.
Oh my goodness.
So you saw the back of the set and the front of the set, noises off. So we were building it in someone's like workshop garage thing that was enormous. And then trying to find a space to put it in, and we ended up in the former Staples store.
Oh, wow.
That is now, I think, Big Lots.
Yes.
Nice.
We had to take measurements to see if we thought we could fit it in between the two posts because it was already in progress, and we just sort of said, keep building. We'll tell you if you have to change it.
We'll have to saw a piece off.
And we literally had we got our documents right before we got in. We got the lease with the landlord right before we got in to move the set in and then start our tech rehearsal process. So, week and a half, 2 weeks before we open. But we didn't have the final fire department documents until that afternoon that we opened our show.
Okay. It was about 4:00 when we got the occupancy permit.
Yep.
And we opened at 8.
Wow.
So, because it was another kind of like, and you have to get this piece together, and then it's like, and then what does the fire department require? And by the time they got in there and looked, it was like, okay, you need to do this and this. And then they looked at what we'd set up for seating and said, you're going to have to change that. And that was 2 days before we opened, or the day before we opened, that they told us that. So I had somebody madly in there, doing railings and other adjustments that we were required to do.
And as an audience member, you're just sitting there and you have no idea. You never have any idea what people went through to get that show on and to keep it going.
As you know, because you've done some theater, but as soon as you step off stage, it's chaos.
Yep.
And the stage is wonderful, and you can step off and nothing's working backstage. You can't find your props.
There's literal
that's
flyers.
That's theater, right? That's why people who work in theater make good employees, because they can solve these problems almost instantaneously.
And
if not, the show doesn't happen.
That's right. You hear that out there. Hire actors, hire creatives. They can literally perform with the house on fire.
Literally.
This is kind of it's sort of related, but a good friend of mine is a props artisan with Fifth Avenue, and she told me that they keep their sets. They're like flying. They're like
Yes.
above the stage on.
Yep.
And so I saw White Christmas last weekend, and that's all I could think about the whole time. Is like, if those actors were to look up, they're just and you have no idea sitting out there that you know that things are coming down and flying up like the second the curtain
That's actually
closes.
in our new space. One of the expensive things we want, but it's called a fly space.
Fly space.
And you can take
Yeah.
your entire set and raise it up.
Raise
and
it up.
The advantage for that for a space is you can do a show, say in the morning or an afternoon show, and then raise the entire set up and lay down a Marley and do a dance and do opera or do ballet, and then raise it down and do another show, a late night show.
Yeah, makes it very versatile.
It's
very
20
quickly.
to 30 minutes once
Yeah.
it's on the rigging to raise and lower all that stuff. So fly spaces are wonderful, but they're very expensive. But it makes the space just incredibly usable. We didn't have one in our old space, but hopefully the new space will have one.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
It's amazing.
So as we wrap up here, let's talk about the new season that's about to open. What show are you working on for the first show of the season?
We're working on a show called Trouble in Mind
Trouble
by
in Mind.
Alice Chidrus. And Trouble in Mind was written in 1955, 56, and had a nice run, 90-some run off-Broadway. It was going to be the first show to be on Broadway written by a person of color. But the producers wanted her to change the ending, which she did. Then she thought about it and went to rehearsals and said, "You can't do this show. I can't do that." So it never made it to Broadway. So the first person of color who had a show on Broadway wasn't until just recently.
Whoa.
It's amazing. But this script is, when you read it, you would never guess that it was written in the 50s. There's a play within a play, and the play inside talks about lynching, and it's kind of dark, but it's a typical 1950s white people white-splaining to the audience what it is to be of color. But the show that show's in is a comedy. And it is it's just incredibly amusing. It is a great show. We start rehearsals on the 2nd, so just in a few days. Do you want to talk more? You know more about this than I do.
No,
Oh.
not really.
I just read it and pick it.
It sounds like you've covered a lot of the bases there. How can the community support you in your endeavors and your future plans, other than going to see the show?
Well, I would say first off, come to see the show.
Come to see the show.
That is how people have, started donating to us, and sometimes their time, sometimes their money, or gotten involved in different ways, or just started bringing more and more people to come see the shows. Because if you're going to get involved with something, you have to believe in it, so you have to know what it's about.
Yeah.
So do that, but also be thinking about how this Performing and Visual Arts Center is going to be something that will help the economy of the city, as well as the amenities that are here, how it draws people, which helps the economy, and then it's nice for us and for our local. There's amazing artists. Just because people aren't making a union wage somewhere does not mean they aren't amazing artists. They're visual artists, they're performing artists of varying kinds, they're literary artists. I mean, there's probably all kinds of artists that I'm not even touching on right now. And so all of them, we deserve to see their work and experience their work. And they deserve a place to be able to do that work. And so part of this is to create that kind of a venue in our area so that all of us get to have that experience together.
Yes.
It's part of what makes us a better community.
Agreed. Agreed.
And just kind of back of the napkin numbers we did about this space is it would add about $1.3 to $1.5 million to the Burien economy outside of what is spent at the venue. So that discounts the bar at the venue and ticket price. This is all spent outside. It would also bring in about 25,000 visitors a year who don't live in Burien to come and see and enjoy Burien and learn about it. And plus, more importantly, as Maggie said, it would let actors and dancers and musicians, people who right now don't have a place to show their art in Burien, a place to do it.
Yeah.
So you can donate. You can donate on our website. We have donate buttons on every page, and that's www.battheater, spelled TRE.org. You can also mail us at bat at P.O. Box 48121, Burien, WA 98148.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So, and any donation, if you say, I don't have $1 million to give you, so I don't want to do anything, that's not how it works. Your dollar, your $2, your $5, if everybody in Burien did that, we are halfway there.
Yeah.
So don't let the fact that money is hard for you get in the way. And if you happen to have $1 million you want to spend or $5 million, we have got a website. Come and check us out. We'll meet with you for lunch and happily take your money.
All right. Now you know how to support. I can't wait for this performing arts space. I'm going to manifest that it's going to happen. I also know that when I want to see art or a show, I hate going into Seattle to do it between the parking and the people.
Yep.
I'm always looking around for where can I get art without having to go into Seattle, and so that's also a plus for anyone in South King County.
And that's going to get more important, both through trying to be greener, and as the numbers of people in Seattle and greater Seattle grow, traffic is going to get worse.
Yep.
Pre-COVID, traffic was horrible. Those numbers, even though a lot of people working from home, if you double the population of the greater Seattle area, that numbers are going to be back.
Yeah.
So having someplace local in South King County is just absolutely essential for the environment and for our mental health.
Yeah.
And which brings me one last thing, Kennedy Catholic, where we are, we have you park around the back of the school. We have signs, but it's free parking. So that
and I can
takes away
attest
one
there's a
those-
lot of it. There's a
Yeah.
lot of parking. So, that's great. So last question we wrap up here, just a quick one. What's a personal mantra or motivational quote that you live by? Inspiration
Oh, wow.
for our listeners. I know it's kind of a big question, but if there's a guiding one for you as an artist or as an individual.
Have that persistence.
Oh yeah, in my office, it's been around for a long, long time, and it's done in Japanese calligraphy. It says, "Persistence is the way of Zen," and it has always been part of my drive to do theater. You have to be persistent.
Yep.
To get a performing arts space, you have to be persistent.
And resilient.
To do almost anything, you have to be persistent.
And for me, this will sound very odd. My current is, it is what it is.
Times you just gotta
Because
roll.
it's also kind of Zen-like. It's accepting that whatever it is you're confronting is what it is, and you can't change that thing that has happened. But then it's what do you do with it? How do you move forward from there? Can you actually, change the effects of that or create some change or some activity moving forward and away from whatever that is?
Yeah.
So for me, because you get caught up in the oh my God, what is this? And I wish it were different.
Yes.
That doesn't, we all have to have that moment, but that does not help us move forward and get on to making things better.
Yeah.
So how do I make things better with what is?
Acceptance of what is.
Right.
I love that.
And for the theater, I think one of the things that drives us, one of the mantras is you should see a new place every year. Mm-hmm. And so our goal is to take you to those places, even if you can't go there or even whatever. But so you see something new and you experience the new and the exciting every year.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Those are great motivational, inspirational mantras to live by. Thank you guys so much for this. It's been lovely. And thank you for joining us today for the B-Town Breakdown. Join us next week, Friday at 6 p.m. on 106.5 KQWZ LP.
Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP FM, South King County.